set this up just a little bit. The title of the talk is Sketchy Data. And I asked Andreas, well, do you mean sketchy sort of like incomplete? Or do you mean sketchy sort of like sleazy? And he said, could be both. And I think there's something to that, because in both cases, we're trying to fill things out and understand things better, and there is a little bit of uncertainty I'll leave it at uncertainty, associated with solving the problem. And the other point he made at lunch is that, in a way, as we were alluding to this morning, we're now facing the problems in data that were always incipient but are now manifest because the data sets are so large. And we now have incomplete data. We always had incomplete data. But now we've got big incomplete data addressing big questions. And again, since we are sort of captives of our history and our tools, we have a level of urgency in getting these problems solved that we never had before. And I think Andreas and his panel want to try and address this, both in terms of the problem they see at hand and the means each of them has towards correcting this and finding a resolution. So with that, I will turn it over to Andreas, who will introduce his guests. Thanks so much.
Thank you, President. So, ladies and gentlemen, as I was thinking about the title of the panel, I got the feedback from my students last fall, which trained me that every time when I said the word sketchy, they went, yes! So the obvious title for this panel was Sketchy Something. And since it's something to do with data here, we decided to call it Sketchy Data. The alternative would have been Shady Data. Because, in this world of the digital exhaust that doubles every 1.5 years, of course our digital shadows are sometimes more real than our reality, right? But shady data didn't have the right connotations. That's why we stuck to sketchy data. So, without much ado, I would like to bring up my panelists. First, David Flaschen.
Oh, sorry.
Hello. So, Dave and we met in the late 90s as I was trying to raise some money for a startup. And then once again, we met at a different context in an office which I actually didn't know was his office, where he said, you were at that startup called Mood Logic, and it was all about data, about metadata for music in order to help people make better decisions, in order to help people to actually discover music. So Dave has done many things. He was an informant to the CIA. He was the CEO of Thomson Financial before they merged with Thomson Reuters. And he's going to help us here today understand how to turn data into money. That's Dave Flaschen. Next to him, we have Gam Dias. So Gam sent me an email years ago, which I, of course, ignored, unfortunately. And then he was persistent and kept on sending me those emails and finally ended me up in being an advisor to this company called First Retail. And Gam has looked at many pieces of data in the world and has many stories about data. Okay. Yeah. And he's going to actually tell us what sketchy data really means. But just hold it 1 second. Claudia. So Claudia I met when I was assistant professor at the University of Colorado in Boulder about 15 years ago, or something like that. Claudia came from then East Germany. She did her undergrad in West Germany and then Boulder, and then did a PhD at NYU. I also happened to be at NYU at the time. And then went on at IBM Research, and is now the chief scientist at a company called Media 6 Degrees. Not Media 5 degrees, not Media 7 degrees, but Media 6 degrees. And she's going to tell us how ultimately it is just basically computers listening to computers, people paying for robots, clicking on other links or stuff like that. So she's going to disillusion something about data and for sure living in the area of sketchy data. And finally, we have George John. And I remember that moment when I was a grad student. It was on the 4th floor of the Stanford Psych Department when an undergraduate came up to me and said, Andreas, you know, when I grow up, I want to be like you. And that was in 89 or something like this, George Jones. So it's a great honor for me to have 4 people who haven't insulted enough and they still show up when they're asked. Thank you for coming here. So let's start with the first question. What actually is data? And we don't have any specific order here. What is data?
For me, data is a digitized event. I'd love to talk about data that isn't digitized, but I can't relate to it from an analysis standpoint. So whether it's text, numbers, as long as it's digitized, it falls into my realm of being of interest.
Okay. What is big data?
A lot of it. So I share Dave's point that for me, data is just facts about the world that are stored somewhere, preferably digitized. If not, we can always digitize it. But big data, for me, it's a great event when all of a sudden my job turned out to be sexy. Who would have known? But in practice, it is a shift towards that was originally driven by a technology of just collecting a lot more of a similar flavor.
I think one cool thing about big data, I guess, I feel like I started, I guess, let's see, do we mention what year it was on the 4th floor? I think that was the late 80s. And then in the mid-90s, I was also at IBM where data warehousing was a popular thing at that time. That was the big data of the 90s did, was the idea of sort of, I guess at the time we felt like business people needed an analogy. So imagine a warehouse, but full of data, not things. And actually then there was this other term, data marts. Like imagine you got a little bit of that and put it somewhere more convenient. But at the time, data warehousing was run on these giant expensive machines. That's why IBM loved it. Teradata loved it. You could sell NCR. You could sell all these expensive machines. And it was all in those days, right? These SQL, relational table format, and everything was sort of carefully guarded against any sort of improvements. Once you had the data and you just kept it there, you didn't want to do much with it other than just flood it a little bit more. And these days, to me, the cultural difference with big data is more of this philosophy around not being so selective and careful, but just like slam it in, right? There's a little bit more data here that's coming out of some log of a thing that's capturing some event. Just put it in, and the combination of things like Hadoop and commodity computing that allows us just to store it so cheaply, and the algorithms that allow us to kind of sift through it to try to find any sort of correlation with something we cared about. It's just also, in some ways, straightforward now. Complex in ways, but it's also straightforward. To me, that's kind of the cool culture of big data. It's just like, let's try. Let's just see what happens.
So it's a mindset in some way, if I hear you right. It's a mindset of just playing around with it, of trying out stuff without worried about breaking it.
Yeah, I think Sketchy is sort of appropriate there too, because you don't even know if it's useful. You don't even know if it's high quality. You haven't really. There's nobody auditing it. It's just coming off of some feed. And I think we'll talk later about how there's a downside to that too, when you don't really have controls over all the actors that are kind of creating that data. But yeah, it's this optimistic sense of let's just try and see what as data scientists we can discover.
Andreas, can I throw in? I mean, I come from a world of transaction processing, so data is transactions to me. But the difference between big data and the old transaction data was the transaction can be now attributed to anything. As the web becomes more semantic, as we have an Internet of Things, everything is giving off data. And we're now able to analyze that, and where that becomes more interesting to us, whereas before it was a checkout or it was a pure data transaction. Now everything is throwing off data. That's why it's big data to me.
So in some way we could say that in science, when something becomes observable, amazing things happen. So the last century was the century where physical interactions had become observable. I did my undergrad at CERN, which is an example where particles get collided with each other, and as we managed to do that, we come up with ideas about the physical world. Now in this century, the interactions between people have become observable. Both explicit actions, when I like something on Facebook, and implicit actions, like just how much my eyes linger on my Samsung phone. My Samsung phone knows that. So it knows whether I'm actually looking at the ad or whether I'm just glancing over something else. So we have reached the interactivity where we can observe social interactions like me and my phone, or maybe like me and my friends. So what However, we have big data now. What is sketchy data to you before we move on here? Let's talk about what is sketchy data. Sketch is something which is not quite complete. What else is sketchy data?
So I like to think of it, I mean, data's data. It's always there. But it's the insights that you get, and depending on how you look at the data and the insights that you want out of it, that makes the difference. And sketchy data is almost data without direction, data that has no directed purpose. So at that point, you don't know how to look at it, and you don't know what data you're missing, and you don't know what data you're analyzing that you shouldn't be analyzing. That's how I look at sketchiness of data.
So I like Gam's point on data just being data. There's nothing to it. There's no moral judgment around data. It's just a fact that was stored somehow. And my feeling is this notion of sketchy, when Andreas proposed it was more about, I think often our interpretation of the data is wrong. We misunderstand data. We attribute something to data that it actually isn't meant to have represented. Now, in some sense, the big data with just stored all approach, it's more honest. I find the new big data is actually slightly more honest than it used to be, because it used to be that despite all of your attempts of good curation, you would mess things up and your averages were reflective of something but not what you intended it to be. And now, if I have the raw data, the way it came in, I may be wrong of what I think it is, and that's actually a great challenge to me to really get to the bottom of what it is that I have collected there at the end of the day. So it's typically my interpretation of what I have that was wrong, and that gives this kind of sketchy or shady mindset. And the example that I have is, so I live in digital advertising, and the way it works is that when you click on a site and there's some space for an ad, there's probably a request into a real-time auction. At that point, there will be an auction where some of us are going to bid and decide within 15 milliseconds whether or not we want to show you an ad. Now, that's recorded. It looks to me as if you wanted to be in the site, and I get to choose whether to show you an ad. Turns out that these days, very often, almost more often than not, actually you didn't choose to be on that site. It's some malware on the computer that generated an HTTP request to some site that actually doesn't really exist. Well, kind of exists, but not really. And the ad won't be seen by anybody either. So my interpretation of what I've recorded was wrong.
So, Claudia, we need to go more slowly here. Because Claudia explained to me earlier when we had coffee how to do this. So what she told me was, I need to create some site, and it doesn't really have to have any content in it, just sort of some words on a page. And then I need to give somebody money who sends traffic to that site. And then I can go to advertisers and say, look, I have all that traffic to my site. You better, show ads on my site so I can get paid, or something like this.
That's exactly how it works.
How it works. What do you think about this? What I didn't get to finish here with John. John is the CEO of Rocket Fuel.
Yes, you only expressed my admiration for you, but nothing else.
Exactly. So besides Martini, which was very remarkable, besides knowing all the dirt about one of the startups, I was in a remarkable evening that evening. He was at Yahoo, where he did lots of big data stuff, took the learnings, and then maybe 5 years ago, started Rocket Fuel.
Yeah, actually, it was a concept that I was going to do in '96, well before Yahoo or any other company, but just didn't have the guts to start a company at that time. I often wonder what would have happened if I had gone ahead. We had a term sheet even back then. But yeah, I think, Claudia and I, we live in similar worlds. We both try to help advertisers be efficient. There's this famous quote about half your ad spend is wasted, you just don't know which half. And so we try to help them not just understand that, but just on their behalf, not waste their money. I mean, one way to waste it is by showing ads to robots, basically. The scale of what Claudia was mentioning is, so we're global. We have a bunch of different data centers that are all talking back and forth to Google and all these Facebook and other companies that are giving us these opportunities to bid on ads. And so it's about 35 billion times a day that we get a chance to show an ad to somebody. And there's a lot of junk. I mean, so there's pages where, you wouldn't want your mother to see it. It's weird stuff that people want to show each other, and so you don't want ads to go there, and you don't want to waste your money on this bot traffic. So it's interesting, the little sub problems. I don't know about you. Anybody remember the story of Lord Rutherford discovering the structure of an atom by bombarding tin with ions? And a lot of the ions sailed through, and so he decided that atoms must be mostly empty space. I often feel like Lord Rutherford, like you have this limited aperture into this weirdly dynamic ecosystem with all these actors doing all these things, and you see something weird in the data, and you mentioned getting to the bottom of it.
Yeah.
It's just fun to kind of hypothesize what on earth is happening, because it is sort of, if you want to go with the sketchy data, like, it is kind of sketchy data. Nobody has certified that this data element will always mean this thing. And so there's just a lot of time you spend trying to figure out, how can I conduct some experiment in this world? What's my tin that I bombard with atoms, or ions rather, to figure out what's really going on?
So in many cases, data get created for one purpose, but then get monetized in a different way. So as I said at the beginning here, Dave, former CEO of Thomson, is known as the guy who managed to repurpose and repackage data and make money on that way. Do you want to talk a little bit about data and information services, how you see, people call it Flaschen's law, but he says I shouldn't say that, how you see that going?
Well, I hope that I'm reinforcing your career decision, because my fundamental belief is that the market for information services is limitless. And the reason for it is that the cost of capturing, distributing, storing, and analyzing digital events is coming down at 20 to 40% per year. And I believe that the business that we are in is to help our customers make more money and better satisfy their customers. When I'm in Europe, I say, help your customer, better satisfy your customers and make more money, but in the US, we talk money. And there is a defined value for an improved decision or an improved workflow process. The value of that tends to be flat to up. So if you are analyzing information to improve a decision and it costs you more to improve the decision than the value of that improved decision, just wait 2 years and you have a new business.
You reminded me, Jerry Friedman, the stats professor at Stanford, who collaborated with Bryman here and others to create CART and a number of other kind of groundbreaking statistical algorithms. He had a very similar story just about his own decision as a professor and a researcher, whether to spend his time trying to get good at proving theorems or creating algorithms. And he said, proving theorems is going to be as expensive at any point in your life, but algorithms, playing around with data, he could just see that was getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And so that's how he chose the more experimental or kind of applied route in stats.
So I'll give you one example. First Call is a service that transports research reports on publicly held companies from the people who create it, commonly known as the sell side, to the people who consume it, the Fidelities of the world who invest in stocks. There was a point in time, because of the richness of that content, both text, charts, and data, that it was challenging to get it from point A to point B with immediacy and ubiquity. Now that's straightforward, but the reason that First Call has survived and thrived is that as we saw this stuff going along our pipes, and by the way, we got paid by the people who sent it and by the people who consumed it.
Nice.
We saw this little data in each report that said earnings estimate on Apple, on IBM, on Google. And we said, wouldn't it be interesting if we use sophisticated Andreas-type algorithms to take the 12 earnings estimates, adding them up, dividing by 12, and coming up with the consensus estimate. So we created a derivative data set that not only cost us nothing, we were getting paid to get, and we redefined the industry. Nobody cared about whether you grew by 6% year over year. They cared about whether you beat or missed your First Call consensus estimate. So that's an example of derivative data, and hopefully an example of why I think the information services business is of limitless size over time.
I've always wondered who to blame for not using median. It's horrifically exposed to high leverage outliers, right? It's,
yes,
nevertheless, they call it consensus.
I know.
We actually now have a customized version for people who actually say, wait a second, these guys are at 320 and everyone else is $1.80. Don't tell me the consensus is 220. No, it's $1.80. We wipe that out for you. But we had to get a little more sophisticated over time.
Let's get back to big data. Ultimately, I think what we should focus on are decisions people make. Because if we just talk about interpretation, it's not as much as starting with decisions. Here's an example of a decision. Which route should I take home? Should I take this route or should I take that route? When I was a postdoc at Xerox PARC, we had thinking machines, connection machines too, which were just humming along, trying to compute whether the traffic on 101 was going to be laminar or turbulent, which meaning traffic jam. Today, 100 million people, today, May 31st, 100 million people provide data to a company called INRIX. Probably none of you have heard of. But if you, for instance, have a BMW or a Garmin device, that in a B2B way, business to business, shares your geolocation or your navigator's location or your car's location with a Seattle-based company out of Microsoft actually called INRIX. Now, in exchange to that, they don't need complicated models. They just see how are the cars moving on 101 right now. And based on that, they help you make the decision whether to take this route or that route. So, as we speak here about data, about big data, about sketchy data, one thing I want us to think about, what are decisions that are possible now based on data that were probably not based on data a few years back? So what are decisions where we now have data, in some cases maybe social data, if you think about Airbnb, whether you have somebody crash on your sofa, crash in your spare bedroom, or whether you are crashing in somebody else's house. That is based on both sort of people's Facebook reputation, their friends, as well as actually an objective identification.
It is interesting. When I was in school, you mentioned this frontier shifting in the 80s. Operations research, it was all about how could you use algorithms to decide if you were going to have a factory. Do you put it here or there? There was these massive decisions involving tens, hundreds of millions of dollars. And these days, that frontier has moved so far that companies like ours make decisions that are fractions of a penny. With a lot of hardcore, so it's interesting, coming up with a consensus estimate for a company, you're doing 12 floating point operations or 13 with the division. We're doing like thousands or tens of thousands of floating point operations just to make a decision that's worth a fraction of a penny, but you just can. It's actually quite economical to do so.
So I think that people always try to make decisions based on data, but the shift is really the granularity of data that you have to make your decision. And I don't know much about, I got into the advertising and marketing world only 3 years ago and still know not much about it, but what people used to do, there was a survey of the interest group and they figured out it's the urban soccer moms who should be interested. Then they went out and found, okay, who's watching what TV series, and they decided that this particular one has a high percentage of urban soccer moms, and off they ran to actually now show the ad for that product on that series. This is arguably data. You ask people for opinions, you collect information. That was data. But the reality is that not every urban soccer mom is the same urban soccer mom. And by the way, you may be completely wrong about more than or less than half of the interest group of your product today. The data in terms of granularity, we have browsing behavior, we have events, every single thing, whatever we see about your actions online that are fed into algorithms that automatically estimate what is your probability of actually being interested in this specific type of Nike running shoes. And I will score every person individually gets a different score. That score changes. Every time you do something, that is updated. Maybe you just bought it and I don't need to bother you with ads anymore. But if I think you are actually on that edge and I can push you a little bit and incent you to buy it now, then I'm showing you an ad now. So it used to be on data. It was just pretty terrible in terms of the quality of the decision you could make with it.
Can I add to that? I think going from data to big data, insurance risk is it's always been a data calculation. And actuaries, they make great data scientists. And historically, insurance risk was assessed against, a set of questions that you'd ask in your policy. I ran a data strategy group for an insurance company where we were putting telematics boxes into cars, and we were getting actuals back, and we could tell those actuals that 18 to 25-year-olds, they had a higher risk of accident between 10 at night and 3 in the morning. Now, not only can you change the premium, you can also change behavior, because if you set a premium, now you know when the driver is driving, you can do 10 cents a mile during the day, $1 a mile in the night. So this is where big data becomes super interesting, is how you can use it to change behavior in time.
But I would say this is only day one, because now what they have in the cars, they have little cameras in there which measure the size of your pupils and tell you maybe how excited you are, whatever is happening. And they also measure your breath, whether there's alcohol in your breath. They measure what's going on behind you in the car. They measure if you're talking on the phone. So I think I agree with you that behavior change is ultimately the goal. But going back to insurance, I would argue that insurance as we know it has come to an end. Because, and Arno and I had this discussion a bunch of times, in the past, people really, pooling of risk for insurance in other cases, people just didn't know the data to the granularity we have it now. Now, many companies or universities, organizations, governments still hide behind saying, well, we actually just don't have those data. Jay Chan's example for the future of education, we just don't have the granularity of data knowing what's going on in the classroom. We do. But what as society should we do with it? For instance, I have a brother who is disabled, mentally disabled. So, if you can see this in somebody's DNA, if you can measure in somebody's DNA what their chances are of, not doing well when they grow up, what do you do with that information? In the past, we had no way of knowing. Now, for $100, you can know, you can predict what people's chances are of not doing well in the future. So what do we do with big data? What do we do with sketchy data when it comes to decisions of society?
I personally, I'm extremely data hungry, and in the sense, any decision I have to make, I'd love to have as much information available, and preferably, what good does it do me if I know only my own medical test? I need to know what the hell it means. I need to know what it actually translates to in terms of a risk in a similar population. So just having my own data is probably not terribly useful, but I personally like to have full information for making my own decisions. I think there's a distinction when the insurance company says, nope, you're not going to get health insurance because we know you'll have something pretty bad pretty soon. That's, I think, the interesting external decision making. From my perspective, external. There's certainly a company for which it is internal. That's very different.
I was just pushing Gam's point that, for you, the insurance, with your current pupil size and your, breath content, your decisions would be twice as expensive your insurance as the taxi would be. So the rational agent says, I leave my car here and I take a cab. But what if you cannot change the behavior because it's something that's in your DNA which tells us that even if you try, you can't? What do we do as society? How do we pool risk there?
It's a challenging question because stratified pricing cures all if you have the ability to stratify price. So in environments where uniform pricing is mandated, you have people choose not to participate in that market. And I don't think insurance is going away because of the behavioral need for people to insure against catastrophic events, as unusual as they are. However, I do think that there is going to be a rethink relative to uniform pricing versus stratified pricing by pools of people who fit into categories that are not controversial. So putting women in one category and men in another category for insurance, obvious statistically, impossible psychologically. But there are ways that you can categorize people for insuring for cars. As an example, working with a company that only wants to know two things. How many miles do you drive a day? And where do you drive? With those two things, they think they can make a great leap in terms of assessing the likelihood that you will incur expenses relative to your insurance policy. There's a lot of other things they'd love to collect, and in fact, they can collect. They just can't usefully use that in their algorithms without the privacy world saying, no, that's not fair. Women, men, not fair. Age, teenagers, fine. Over 65 years old, not fine. So that is really kind of the interesting test of what you can and can't do, and why this idea of big data is so interesting, because you can always find your way to an answer by eluding and avoiding the objections along the way. So this is why I'm confident that there'll still be an insurance industry and that we'll be able to continue to improve decision makings without stepping needlessly on the privacy air hose.
So I've got a question. I'm not very good as a panel member because I've got that question. But is there a practice of data ethics? Is there a data ethics officer? Because each of us as individuals are giving off more data and we're sharing it, explicitly or implicitly. More the case, it's implicitly shared. Do your organizations have a data ethics practice?
It's common in our industry to have a chief privacy officer to address. We do. It's interesting. I think it's kind of funny talking about the ethics of, should you give someone insurance or not because their genes say there might be a risk. I think we probably enjoy we just show ads to people. So it's pretty innocuous relative to some of the deep questions posed. But I think it is very important to be kind of a good guy about it. So our industry generally, there's actually a lot of energy spent, mostly ensuring that we're trying to build, to the extent that we're trying to understand somebody out there, we're only trying to understand it as an aggregate of, let's say, all users on a device, or what we would call kind of a non-personal way. So that there's no way to kind of hack. Even if you could hack into our system, there's no name or email. It's kind of funny. We get about one email a week. It's about a month into our own privacy email inbox. And it's usually somebody very angry. I'm not quite sure why. That gives us their name and phone number and email and says, "Please opt me out of your advertising." And we kind of have to explain. We're totally happy if you don't want to see ads from us. Here's how to do it. But we don't know who you are, so I can't. The information you're giving me isn't.
Now we do
something. So we didn't know before. But here's how you can opt out through the standard mechanisms in the industry.
I want to reinforce George's point. For those of you who are now in or contemplating getting in to this racket, and the money's good and only going to get better.
Maybe we can call it something other than a racket. Industry, field.
I could use a British term, scheme, but that doesn't work well in this country either. But
discipline.
The discipline, even better. That's why he has a PhD. So you absolutely will, without fail, step on the air hose of data privacy. Might happen once a week, might happen once a month, might happen once a year, might happen once every 3 years, but it will happen. So by definition, you have to have a privacy officer, and even better, a third-party panel of the meanest data privacy people you can find, because when it hits the fan, you want to say, that wasn't our intention, here's all the money we're spending, here's how we try to conduct ourselves in an above-board way, here's how we're fixing the problem that's been put in front of us. But just slap our hand, don't cut our hand off. Because data privacy cannot be avoided as an issue if you're in this discipline.
But it is interesting. Even in quantitative finance, you can sort of wonder, this is sort of why I went into advertising instead of, it's just, is it cool to take someone's money just because you have more machines and you figured out this data feed? It is now, I guess. That's the way it's been designed. But, it should be, I guess. Likewise, there's just a lot of applications where you can worry about an asymmetry, where that sort of American democratic ideal of protecting, the smaller populations kind of kicks in, and you wonder, what do you need to do?
It was one of the most horrible parts of allowing stock exchanges to go public, because a third of their revenues come from their data feeds, and so up until about 6 months ago, they were abetting, is that the word? The high-frequency traders with a feed that was just slightly faster than everyone else. Mm-hmm. And nobody really understood it, because when you're talking in milliseconds, you say, well, how can that be important to anybody? Well, it turns out that these traders were paying a lot more money to get the same bidder just a little bit ahead. And then somebody found out about it and said, you must be kidding. The individual investor is going to be hurt a little, but the average investor who's using brain power and all the rest is going to be hurt a lot. So that's an example of how something started out working great when you had private exchanges, and now you have public exchanges, and they're trying to raise the price of their stock. Bad decision on their part.
So
I just want to give people a heads up. We have 20 minutes left, and I would like to have some questions from you. So we have one microphone. Where is the microphone? Here's the microphone. So if people have a question, then raise your hand, and the microphone will find its way to you. Claudia, sorry to interrupt.
No, I mean, my reflection on the question is that for two reasons, I think the ethical consideration is, in my opinion, resting on the decisioning that is being driven more so than on the data. As you point out, Dave, you can always circumvent. You say you can't use gender, well, then I use something that correlates with gender. And you know what the worst is? I may not even know that I use it. So you can't prohibit the use of gender. It's just practically infeasible to do so. I don't see how you could actually effectively do that. And I also liked George's example. I mean, in terms of ethical decisions, people may get all antsy about privacy when it comes to advertising, but the reality is that the decisioning that was made in the financial industry then that was not privacy violating at all, had much more significant negative impact on society at large and individuals. I don't know how to implement that either in terms of forecasting the impact and the ethical value of the decisioning you're implementing, but I tend to, in general, when it comes to analytics as well as ethics, I prefer to start on the decisioning level.
So if anyone ever wonders why important newspapers like the New York Times need to continue to exist, it's because if somebody doesn't expose that 20 millisecond lead, it's never one that the privacy people jump on that leads to its elimination. Otherwise, it's going to happen. You got two sides that are happy. People who are making more money providing the data, people making more money getting the data, and the individual investor not having a clue. So anyone here who curses the data privacy, data security world really needs to recognize that we all need an umpire to play the game. Everyone hates the umpire, but you need the umpire to play the game. And it's why I've always been comfortable in working with some of the meanest, most recalcitrant people out there, because they're really trying to keep us honest, and it's an important thing for our industry to thrive.
Any questions? There's a microphone. Let's start there, and then
Okay. Hi, this is a really...
Introduce yourself.
I'm Stuart Geiger. I'm a PhD student at the iSchool here. So I love all these talks about ethics, but I want to ask, because it seems like we're talking about ethics often in a way about what not to do and what other people say we ought not to do. Ethics as sort of avoiding harm and avoiding sort of scrutiny and messing up. But I want to ask sort of about an older understanding of ethics as sort of goodness or virtue, and like what it means to do good data science, to be sort of a data, whatever you're doing, whether you're targeting ads, whether you're talking about supply chain management or financial or modeling things like that. What are the qualities of kind of a good, virtuous data scientist?
My answer would be is really to take the objective of the recipient of your analysis at heart. One of the problems with data science is the communication, that the person who needs it doesn't understand enough on the intricacies, and they ask you for something that you know isn't really what they need. And yes, you can answer the question, but you know that the way it's going to be used will be wrong. And to actually push back and really force the dialogue to say, is that really what you need? I really think that you have to go back on the drawing board, bringing this string together of what would help you make the right decision. And sometimes I'm being a very kind of stubborn participant in that, and you may not like me for that because I will not give you what you want.
Yeah, I think virtue is... there's... I actually thought by creating a successful company that was just based on reason and using data science essentially to help kind of a confused and a little bit random industry called advertising. If you could show that you can fix this thing by just bringing computer science, reason, data to it, if that could be an example of kind of getting the fuzziness out of other industries too, it would be a good thing. And I think that is kind of happening. Like it's just surprising now the kind of people you'll see and various businesses talking about building models for things. I think that's a win, because otherwise we're just wasting our resources. Building products, building companies, just doing things that never should have been done in the first place. So that's kind of a win, just making the whole world more efficient. I also have a more kind of old school answer, which is that we do work with nonprofits. We run pro bono free campaigns for them, and use some of our own profits to send kids to high school in India and things like that. So I mean, there's also just kind of generally we call it the Gives Back program. So that's sort of basics. But I think there are a lot of nonprofit initiatives that even when I was doing my own PhD, I got some data from one of Stanford's groups to just explore responses in a database. There's a lot of stuff out there that can be optimized. Often it is kind of the nonprofit sector that kind of catches on to some of the business intelligence trends later than other groups. So that would be another thing to look at.
So with the exponential growth of data, with the transparency that brings to bear, with, as we talked last night, when you call up some call center and they say, you're speaking on a recorded line, I always say, yes, and I'm recording it too, to create some symmetry in this conversation, not have it just used against me. Now, with all this transparency, add WikiLeaks to the game. Do you think that we are moving to a more ethical world, to a better world, to a less ethical world? What can we do actually in our little epsilon squared we have to move things in the right direction?
There's a wonderful phrase which is, would you be happy if all the facts were known? One of the reasons that WikiLeaks is so controversial is because when all the facts are known, it turns out what we're being told is less than the truth. So I love your question on the positive side of ethics, because I'm a capitalist. I apologize. But by helping people make better decisions and improving workflow, you're increasing productivity, which is the most powerful driver of GDP growth. And when you have GDP growth, a lot of wonderful things happen. We were having a discussion earlier, and they're saying, all I'm trying to do is make advertising more effective. God, it's incredibly important. When I was running AC Nielsen, I was trying to help people decide what to be on the store shelf so that when you walked into a grocery store, you got the experience of variety as well as the things that you wanted to buy. That cannot be something that's left up to amateurs. It takes the people in this room to make that a delightful, productive experience. And I think that's the wonderful part of the ethics of the business that we're in.
Good questions. Where's the
mic is
microphone?
up there.
Okay. Maybe what I propose is we just hear the 5 or 6 questions right now, and then we answer them, because if we do it sequentially, then I think we might not get to it. Is that a deal? Just listen to the questions, and then we pick what you like.
Wow.
So better think about the questions well. Question number 1.
All right. So you asserted that maybe insurance was a historical artifact because as people know more, it won't make sense to insure groups of people that you don't know enough about, or you know too much about, I guess. But over the last couple of days, I hear a lot of concern about risks of privacy, both ethical risks and I assume monetary risks. So my question is, do these guys who own companies, would they be interested in a product of insurance for privacy liability?
Got it. Let's listen to the next question. If you just pass the microphone behind you, please.
Hi, I'm Alan Chu from Exceed Capital, early stage venture capital firm. My question is, you've all had illustrious careers in this field. What has changed and what has not changed? Going beyond the first approximation of that, yes, lots more data, relationships being visualized now, we know that. But from your perspective, What has changed and what has remained constant?
Good question. It's a question Jeff Bezos always asks. What has changed? What hasn't changed?
Myself, but I'll let it.
Yes, please.
Be myself, be the last person.
Hi, my name is Paul Abraham from SAP. This is a question to an earlier point that you had discussed. You are having data come out as a raw feed. And there is noise in the data. And to me, noise is data that we have not understood. Because there have been so many instances where they have found planets in the noise, that they were almost going to throw away, but later on computing techniques were able to discern them. So how can we label something as sketchy? Because according to me, sketchy data is data we have not understood. It may be fraudulent, it may be good data as well.
Yes.
So, yeah, okay. 2 more hands were up here. Why don't you ask your question here?
Okay. I am means 2012 graduate from the high school, and currently I work as a data analyst at AOL. One question that I have always in my mind is, when it comes to big data, we are leveraging this amazing technology to collect data from different sources. Like companies like Comscore or Nielsen, they hire participants, they install softwares on their computers to track their behavior. And businesses or entities like us, we rely on that data to interpret the user behavior. So we are so happy in that side about that we are collecting this big data and we are summarizing and relying on that conclusions or any data interpretation. But what I have here, what the question that I have here is, we are separate. It seems like we are separating ourselves from the users, like in terms of in-person contacts. We don't send individual surveyors. We don't have ethnographers to collect the data from individuals. So is that sketchy to you that all the data that we are collecting and we're relying on, we call it big data, is collecting by robots and softwares, mostly digital surveys?
I actually would question that that's correct what you're saying. If you think about one of the largest data factories we have, Facebook, I think it is mainly people who actually create the data. And it is explicitly created data, likes, comments, pictures, tagging, and so on and so forth. So I think I don't completely agree with your premise that it's now
it's a question that I have. It's a question that I have. Like earlier in the discussion, we had that 51% of the web traffic is not human. Like all those spammers that come and comment on stuff, and put the Facebook aside. We are talking about web analytics. We are users that consume the contents. Who are those users?
So let me put it this way. In our preparation, when we were sitting out there, we had an amazing surprise. And I want to actually ask the audience here. Show of hands. Who of you has heard about Yahoo? Okay. Who of you has heard about TripAdvisor? Okay. So now, I'm a physicist, so things within 10-20% are the same for me. Who of you thinks that TripAdvisor has a larger market cap than Yahoo?
Yahoo X Baidu.
Oh, come on now.
Who of you thinks that Yahoo has a bigger market cap than TripAdvisor? It's a factor of 2. But not the way around you think.
When TripAdvisor went public, everyone assumed that Google was going to crush them, which is why I really love the challenge of how you make money from these businesses, because they've done a wonderful job of taking what theoretically could be a commodity service and turning it into something that's sustainably competitive. I want to try one of the answers, or an answer to one of the questions which was raised, which was yours, and that is, what's changed over the last 10 years or so? From an analytical standpoint, I'm really intrigued about behavioral versus analytical. 10 years ago, nobody could spell behavior. Today, people are thinking about behavioral analysis in an intriguing way where the math breaks down. I find that fascinating and a field of remarkable opportunity. The second thing I would say is 10 years ago, data analysts were kind of glorified actuaries. They got paid okay, but they weren't accorded much prestige. Today, they're the rock stars and they're getting rich. So you've chosen the right field. And the right place to get insight.
So I wanted to maybe comment on your question and also relating to the noise. I'm not a particular friend of humanly collected information by going and talking to other humans, because what they tell you is the way they would like you to remember them, but not necessarily consistent with what they do. I don't say that this is not relevant information, but the business I'm in, trying to make decisions based on predicting how people are going to behave and not what people are going to say. I find the factual information of what people do if they think they aren't observed to be, or maybe if they're observed, much more to the point than if you were to go and ask them. So I personally have a preference for that. Now, to my comment that half of my data isn't what I think it is, true, but it's up to me to figure this out, and I have the tools and the means to do so. So all it comes down to is going back and annotate those 50% that probably wasn't intentional human behavior to say, this actually is an instance of non-intentional, non-human behavior. So I'm just adding another layer on top of it. And that relates a little bit to your question of noise. I don't think of it as noise. It may be information I haven't understood yet, but the reality is I live in a data set. We collect browsing behaviors. I mean, we have, 10 million URLs that we basically see people go to. I can't look at any of them. It's not that I understand them. And you know what? I don't need to understand them. For the technology we have in place to predict your behavior, guess what? My machine doesn't understand that this is a blog about politics or a blog about running. My machine doesn't understand anything anyway. For the technology to work and to really improve decision making, there's very little understanding required, and also very little then personally identifiable and privacy violating things happening. So for me, the distinction between, this is good data because I know what it is, and that's noise, has become really, really secondary. And if the data is plain random and useless, my algorithm will start to ignore it. I trust my methods to figure that part out. I don't need to.
Can I pick up on
Cool.
just that for the gentleman from SAP, and I'd like to address your data insurance thing as well. We deal with a lot of different data products, and our philosophy is not to throw anything away, and we talk about a data lake rather than a warehouse. Just bring us all, put it in, don't even structure it, because if you start to structure it, the structuring allows you to lose detail as well, so don't structure it. So our philosophy is very much retain everything. I'd love to talk to you more about the data insurance product, because what your ideas are, but the problem with it, trying to create a risk-based product, is I can't quantify the loss. It's so nebulous right now. And I think what we have today is an equilibrium that's just established over the years, which is moving and changing as people become more familiar with the risks of throwing your data out there. It's already out there. I mean, a few years ago, Emily Nussbaum wrote a piece in the New York Times talking about children who have grown up with this, and they have a natural bilingualism around what they share and what they don't share. So I think that I don't know about a data privacy insurance, privacy liability product. It's tough.
It exists today. It exists today. It's called D&O. And the reason they throw it under D&O, it's part of that catch-all category where everyone knows you will eventually step on your air hose for privacy, and you need some way to protect yourself. And so they've thrown it into D&O and raised prices of D&O to cover it.
D&O is directors and officers.
Directors and officers insurance. So the people who are at the most senior levels of the company are covered.
I think one of the things, just in terms of what's changed, I think the degree to which this is thriving right now may not even be apparent. I mean, a while ago I realized, there's multi-factor models for the return to security. You can build a multi-factor model on the return to your career as well. And so I chose data science. Everybody told me that was like the new plastic, of the 90s, and that turned out to be pretty good. And I would say, digital media and just, basically anything that touches that right now is pretty amazing in terms of just the growth and the tailwinds right now. Consumers just shifting their attention ever more to digital. People are just watching TV on, Hulu and other, video spots now. So it's a great time to be doing data science related to digital media. And honestly, forgive me, we're hiring. We're trying to hire 300 people this year. We're halfway through. That's doubling the size of our company just in this 1 year here. So please tell your friends to get in touch. Check out rocketfuel.com. Sorry.
So what I propose is to actually, since this is almost the end of the conference, to be quiet for 1 minute. And I watch the time. And for each of us to think, what was the most important thing they learned in these 1.5 days? And then I give each of you a chance to say this, and we all go home. So I have 1 minute of silence where I think I invite each of you to reflect those 1.5 days. What was the one thing you learned you didn't know before, which you think actually matters? Okay, so one sentence from each of you here.
Oh, all right. So I thought you were going to start at the other side. For me, it's just kind of the prevalence and commonness of awareness of big data and opportunities around it, so just by seeing so many people here at the conference.
I had never really given any thought to the fact that there might be an issue with my data remains. And I'm very matter of fact about the fact that I may disappear somewhat accidentally soon. And that I'm fine with, but the reality that somebody might be emotionally hurt by data remains that I haven't accounted for, I found slightly disturbing.
So we live in a world, and we're barraged being in this industry with vendors telling us how much technology there is available and how much infrastructure there is and how much we can do. And I think coming to this panel and thinking about it, really, it's the importance of the human analyst. And as you said, it's like the data scientist asking the right questions of the customer or of the problem to be solved. And the human that sits behind all of this is actually still very important.
I'm from the East Coast, so I actually had my eyes open to the sophistication and focus of Berkeley around information, and I applaud you for your leadership, and I hope this conference goes for many years to come.
So all that's left for me then is to thank the four of you for coming here, for helping me, and to thank Anno for the trust she once again puts into me of not totally screwing up. Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to say this was a fantastic panel. It was a fantastic day and a half. And I want to thank everybody who has been here for all or part of the time. I think we all learned a lot, and it was a very good minute that I just spent thinking about what I learned. I hope all of you had a good minute as well. Thanks for coming. Thanks again to the staff for putting this together and helping with all of the logistics. And we will look forward to seeing you at DataEDGE 2014. Did you have a question?
Will any of the events be
We have videoed it all, and we'll put it on our website. Okay, thanks a lot to everybody.
Thank you.